So we're going to start this school year with a series focused on how we can be on target together as a church family. And this series is going to focus really on one subject, and you'll understand what that subject is about 10 minutes or less into the message today. And of course, this syncs up with some of the conversations that we have had as a church recently, and we are going to have. Start here with me this morning. Just mentally, go through the list of all the things that you do, that you actually do in your life. You hold a job and go most of the time. You run your kids back and forth to sports practices. You cut your lawn when you have the time. You try to avoid going to McDonald's too often because of all of the above, and on down the line goes, right? The list of things you actually do is long. Now compare that list to this question. What do you want to do? What do you wish you could do? How does that list compare to the first one? Maybe you wish you could retire. Maybe you wish you had more kids. Maybe you wish you had less kids. Right? Maybe you wish you had a different job. Maybe you wish you didn't quit college 10 years ago, and you wish that you could complete your degree, and on down the line goes. Here's the thing, those two lists for many of us don't often match, right? We don't want to do the things we often do. In fact, this second list often for most of us is incomplete, meaning we are never going to do a lot of the things on our personal wish list. In your entire lifetime, a lot of the things you spend your time pining for, you're never going to do. And that's why you need to consider this question. What are you actually motivated to do? Now, what's the difference between that question and the first two? There is a difference, right? Most of us confuse that. We think that what we're actually doing are the things that we're motivated to do. Or we think the things that we want to be doing are the things that we're motivated to do. But at least see with me on the outset here that those lists are very different. Let's talk about our church for a moment. Here are two phrases from Jesus that he said matter most in the life of any Christian and any human being. Love God with everything that you are, and love your neighbor the way that you love yourself. Are those wants? Are those motivations? What are they? Don't assume they're motivations, right? How would we know if we're motivated to do those things and not have them just be statements on a screen? These are things that you said about yourself last April and May as a church, as we started to work on the things that we are and how we want to grow into the things that God is making us. Those are lovely things up on the screen, that we're a neighborly love kind of church. We're an accepting, safe place for a just wide, diverse mosaic of people. That's awesome. We're warm and we're welcoming and we're relationally bonded together. So here's my question to you. Are those motivations up on the screen? Are they wants? Are they things we actually do? Are those things we wish we could do? Are those things we're motivated to do? And how do you tell the difference? Don't assume they're motivations. As you might guess, there is a rich and deep field of study in the sciences on motivation, how human beings are motivated. There are several different major theories about how we're motivated. Here are two. These are deficient theories. One is that you are motivated by your biology, something physical or physiological in your body. Some of this is very basic, like when you're hungry, you want food. When you're thirsty, you want something to drink. But much of your behavior, the more you do it, actually becomes very physiological. You wire it into your brain. So here are some things about you and me that are actually physiological. We are motivated by something biological in us. Your reaction to things is often biological. Those of you who have a hot temper, that's biology as much as it is anything else. And you haven't learned how to govern it. Those of you who have anxiety issues or worry issues, the longer you do that, the more that becomes biological or neurological. It's a physical thing, and you're not choosing it anymore. So you are motivated to be anxious because you've done it a lot, and your body and your brain are used to it. You follow me? The other one is just as interesting. Another major theory about what motivates you and I to do what we do is that we do what works for us. We do what pays off. We do what rewards us. Now, of course, like your job totally fits into this, right? Why do you do your job? Because you get a paycheck every week or every 2 weeks. Or there's the promise of advancement and better income for your family. It's the reward system at play. Most of how we do employment in this country is built on the reward system of motivation. But see, it's way more than that. A lot of why you and I do what we do in our families and among our friends, the way we treat people, is because it works for us. We get what we want when we behave the way we do. Why do you lose your temper at your kids? Because it works. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it works. And they stop and they finally listen to you and do what you say. And again, going back to the first one, every time you do this, you ingrain this more and more into you. It becomes biological. Think of all the things in your life that you do because they work. Your spouse has been ignoring you or not pulling their weight around the house, in your opinion. And so you decide, well, I'm not going to do anything for a few days. They deserve it. Yeah, guess what? You know why you're doing that? Because there's a payoff. There's a reward to you. And the reward is your spouse will wake up and notice that, in your humble opinion, they're not pulling their weight around the house, and you decided to get their attention by being completely passive-aggressive. My point is, the more you look for this, you find it all over the place. You want to know why most of us do what we do in our lives? Because it works for you. I'm not saying it's best. I'm saying it works for you. Here's the thing. Those are deficient understandings of motivation. Probably the place where all of this information about how human beings are pulled together most is by a guy named Daniel Pink. I'm going to post the TED Talk that he did a few years ago on this subject online this week. If you want to see it, it'll be on our Facebook page. He also wrote a book on it. And what he found is that really what motivates us as people more than anything else is something that comes from the inside, something that comes from us. If you really want to be motivated, if you really want to find those things that motivate you, if you want to be motivated in your family or your workplace, or of course in our context, in our church, then it needs to have these three things. These are the three most important things possible for you to put in place in order for you to be motivated about anything. Okay? Now let me explain these three terms that he reports from his findings of all the research. And what you're going to find is every one of these is extraordinarily biblical and Christian. And in fact, over the course of this series, we're going to talk about it in more depth. What's purpose? You and I will be most motivated to do things that attach us to a cause that is greater than ourselves. Think of how many things in your life you do out of self-interest, or maybe the interest of those who are biologically related to you, i.e. your family. You work for yourself and the needs of your family. You probably have hobbies that are largely about you and what you like to do, or what puts you at ease or relaxes you. Awesome. Here's the thing. Those are not really going to motivate you over the long term, and you will not find them extraordinarily fulfilling because self-interest is too small. You are one person in the world, and you know that you're small and finite. And really what all of us yearn to, every human being, not just Christian people, all of us yearn to feel connected to and a part of something that is more important than me, that is worth my life, something bigger than me. What motivates me is to give to something that I think is worthwhile and big, not just to get from it. And it is at this point that any of you who are somewhat familiar with the Bible ought to hear the echoes of Jesus. Because it is Jesus who said, it is better to give than to receive. It is when you lose your life that you gain it. No wonder these scientists, 2,000 years after Jesus, found what they did. He told us all along. If you want to live a life that's motivated, you need to find what those causes are for you. You want to be a good parent? Help your kids find the things in their lives that are greater than themselves and give them the chance to invest in it. Do this for your spouse. But as a church, this is hugely important to recognize. What are the things that we want to do the most? What are the things that we are motivated to do the most? It's those things that are bigger than ourselves, that rise above our petty, small differences and opinions, our little disagreements in taste and style. We want to do something that matters. We want to do something together that we couldn't do apart. We need purpose. And I suspect that for those of you who call our church home, you have found on occasion times exactly when we have done that. Things like the way we are intentional about loving our neighbor. We're going to talk about this idea of purpose more in the rest of this series. Here's the second one. Mastery. You want to really be motivated? You want to live a life where you are motivated to do the things that really matter to you? You need to make sure that you are exercising mastery in your life. What's that mean? It means that you're getting better at something. That you start here at point A and you know how to take concrete steps forward to point B. And the interesting thing about mastery is you don't ever arrive. The arrival point is not what matters. What does is the journey getting there. You want to see yourself developing and progressing and growing in concrete, discernible ways. And of course, here's what the case I'm going to make to you next week. You know what the biblical term for that is? It's being a disciple. When Jesus called his followers disciples, that's Bible speak for student. What's a student do? They gain greater mastery, at least when they're under the tutelage of good teachers. That's the point. Gain greater mastery. Think about your own life. Where do you know you'd like to change? Where do you know you have a skill or a strength or a passion that you'd like to see expand or develop over the next year or 2 years? Odds are you're going to be most motivated to go after those things if you can figure out how to put a process in place to master them. What if we built our church's life around the idea of helping you be a disciple? Of helping you decide where you want to exercise greater mastery in your life, and then we helped you do it. We didn't spoon feed you out of the jar, but we said instead, here's food. Here are all the raw ingredients. Now, step by step, you decide what you'd like to eat first. You decide how you'd like to put these things together. You decide what's best for you. What if mastery was what we cared about? What if mastery was expected? At our church, you can't just come here and be the same person you've been for 5 years. That's revolutionary. What if the expectation was all of us will be growing and taking concrete steps to do so in our spirituality, relationship with God, and relationship with neighbors? What if? And what if we didn't care what we tried, no matter whether or not it would fail in the end? We're going to do whatever we can. We're going to use all the creative ideas we can, and it doesn't matter whether or not it works long term. What matters is the expectation we will do whatever it takes for all of us to gain greater and greater mastery as disciples of Jesus, and how that expresses itself in our homes, in our workplace, our emotional life, our spiritual habits, our money. What if? And you heard in the way I talked about this one, the last one. And there are several words for it. The phrase I'm going to use is self-direction. You want to be able to decide for yourself how you do something, when you do something, and the details of how it looks when you do something. You don't just want to be told. Now here's the thing. Self-direction is not anarchy. Anarchy is everybody deciding for themselves what they're going to care about and then doing it the way that they want. And your life, your family, and any church on the face of the planet doesn't work well when there's anarchy. However, self-direction, that's different. Where in your life are you the most motivated? It's where you can take the most personal ownership. Where in your life are you the most motivated? It's where you take the most personal responsibility and stop expecting somebody else to do it. Stop blaming other people. It's on you. And now you figure out what you will do to begin to find a life of purpose and mastery, those first two terms. See, we know, generally speaking, as a church, for instance, what we want to do together. And it sounds a lot like the most important things that you ought to be doing individually as a Christian. We want to live lives together where we love God fully. We want to live lives together where we love our neighbors, be it ourselves as neighbors or our neighbors around us in our communities. We want to do it well. We want to love them the way that we ourselves would like to be loved. Awesome. What if we let you be self-directed in how that looks? Here's one way we already do that. We have a bank account full of money that you can request money from anytime you want. And it will run through the process of being approved and vetted and whatnot, but we don't set the agenda for that money. You do. That's called self-direction. And the reason you like requesting money, the reason we watch money flow in and out of that fund so much is because of this. It's no surprise. This is one of the places in the life of our church where you get to determine what happens. What if we did that elsewhere? What if you decided what things were taught on Sunday morning? What if you decided what your group did together and when they did it? What if we as a church had a month where one thing was in focus for all of us, but we all got to decide how we did that in our lives? That's not anarchy, that's self-direction. And it's us treating you like adults, not children. And maybe you'll recognize with me when you consider this key piece of human motivation that so often in churches we treat people like children or adolescents, not adults. This is how adults are supposed to live. Jesus wants you to take personal responsibility for the most important things in your life. And being self-directed allows you to do that. Now, if you're a Christian person, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, I think there might be a piece missing, though. I buy all this. I can even begin to see how all three of those things are pretty biblical. But I think something might be missing, and you're right, something is. So I'm going to add something, a fourth piece to this recipe of what should motivate us, what can motivate us, how we can live a motivated life individually and as a church. And in order to do that, I need to show you a couple of verses. This is from a kind of innocuous passage in the history book of the New Testament of the early church after Jesus, the book of Acts. In chapter 20, verse 22, this is the Apostle Paul writing, and he says that after his 3 missionary journeys, very late in his ministry, that he was compelled by God's Spirit to go to Jerusalem, which was not going to be a very hospitable place to him as a Christian person, even though he did not know what would happen there. He was, the quote is, compelled by the Spirit. This taps into, for a Christian person, what the Bible would say is missing or incomplete about those 3 motivations that we have. The word compelled means that he felt like there was something driving him or pushing him that was outside of him or independent from him. He didn't decide to do this. He was bound to someone else's will, that person being God. He was compelled by God's Spirit to go to the place that was unsafe for him, to go to the place where he would likely be persecuted. In the end, by the way, he was imprisoned for going to Jerusalem as a response to the compulsion of God's Spirit. Here, the same guy, earlier in his life, writes to a church in the city of Corinth using the same verb. But this time, it's not God's Spirit that compels him, it's something else. He says about his own ministry that the only reason he does what he does as a pastor and a church planter, as a person committed to Jesus, is that he was compelled by the love of Christ. He was driven by it. He was bound to it. He couldn't do anything else. All he could do was say yes. This force from within him, this force from on high was so strong, the love of Christ welling up in him, what else could he do? And that love of Christ looked like realizing that Jesus came for all people, by which he means in that passage the people like him, Jews, and people very much not like him, Gentiles, non-Jews. And that love forced him to realize he should never view somebody just by what they look like or how other human beings regard them. Nope. What he should do instead is look beyond that or within that and realize that everyone has the opportunity to be a new creation in Jesus, the old passing away and the new having come, regardless of how different from him they look or act, or how different their background might be. This kind of love, this kind of wide, embracing, universal love, he says, compelled him. He couldn't do anything else. Christ had loved him that way, and he would love every single solitary person the same way too. So if you're a Christian person, you have to realize that for you, the missing piece from those 3 is that you should expect God's Spirit to be pushing you and driving you, or to use the word, motivating you. You should expect sometimes in your life that you feel an itch or a drive to go and to do in ways that are surprising to you or seem outside of your personality or your norm. This is commonplace when you have a relationship with God's Spirit. And of course, as Paul said, so often the way that looks like is love. You will most know that God's Spirit is motivating you when God's Spirit is pushing you to love in the way that Paul described. I will love the people around me who are not just like me, but are not like me. I'm going to love the people around me that don't come from my background and I don't really understand. I am going to love the people around me who don't have the same tradition or background that I do. That's the opportunity that we have here. So often we gravitate most naturally to people who are most like us or who are our age or in the same life setting. And what Paul is saying is so often love is going to ask you to go beyond that. Beyond your class, beyond your race, beyond where you live, and to reach out to people beyond that. For the Christian person, God's Spirit is our motivational fuel. So I ask you to consider on the front end of this series this simple question. And we're going to explore it together in far more depth as we move forward in this series as a church. What actually motivates you? It's different than what you're doing. And it's different than what you want to be doing. What are you actually motivated to do? And what are we? And the key pieces of finding that out are what you heard me talk about today. Where in your life do you feel attached to something greater than yourselves? Where are you serving a greater cause? Are you? Where are you needing or wanting to find mastery? Step-by-step growth. Where in your life do you need to exercise self-direction? Be set free to do things the way that work for you? Where do you need to do that? And taking responsibility to do so. And are you willing to have God's Spirit push you and move you and motivate you into directions that may initially be uncomfortable? Push you outside of what is safe. Because that's what it did for Paul. And if all of us want to be motivated together, if all of us want to be a motivated church, you can bet your bottom dollar that these four things are going to have to be involved. We take a minute here at the end of the message, and I'd ask you to pause in the quiet and pray something personal to God. And you can put your own words to it, but it's a very courageous, bold prayer to pray. And it is very simply this: ask God to motivate you. Stop being content with being apathetic or lethargic or making excuses for where you are in your life or where we are. And instead, ask the God who loves you deeply to motivate you. Why don't you put your words to that for a moment, and then I'll pray for us all.